Hi, I'm Jeremy, the Zoo Nerd, coming to you live from my backyard in beautiful Los Angeles, California. How are you doing today? I hope you're well. I hope you're happy, healthy, and having fun. Today on our Critter Chat, we're going to continue our week-long celebration of World Oceans Day by talking about another amazing animal from the ocean. Today's Critter Chat is going to talk about manta rays. Now, I've often heard people use that term to describe many different species of rays. Rays are closely related to sharks. They are in a group of animals that are called cartilaginous fish, meaning they don't have bones. They have cartilage skeletons. You'll never find a full skeleton of a shark. You'll never find a full skeleton of a ray because it's cartilage, not bones. It breaks down a lot faster. Manta rays are specifically two very, very large species of rays. Rays are kind of flat animals with kind of pointed wings is what they're called, that help them to move. Most species of rays tend to be bottom dwellers, eating things on the bottom of the ocean or wherever body of water they live. Manta rays are a bit different. Manta rays specifically are huge. The giant manta ray is the largest of all ray species and one of the largest of all fish in the world. The smaller version, which is called a reef manta ray, is also huge. Reef manta rays can typically be between 11 to 15 feet across and weighing in at 2,000 or 3,000 pounds. Their bigger cousins, the giant manta rays, can be up to 29 feet across. That's enormous. They can weigh over 5,000 pounds. That's the same weight as an elephant. So that is a very, very large animal. The word manta is a Spanish word, and it means either blanket or cloak. Because these animals are so huge, when they swim over you, it's like a cloak or a blanket blocking out any light. They are very, very large animals. Unlike most rays that are bottom feeders, these animals don't eat at the bottom of the ocean. They eat typically more in the middle or at the top of the water, near the surface. What else? Up until 2008, it was only thought that there was one species. So it was fairly recent that science was able to distinguish, these rays and these rays look a little different. We think there's a different species going on. So they are very closely related. The reef manta rays tend to live closer to land and only live in areas from like Africa across the Indian Ocean, so south of India, over near Australia, and the islands of Southeast Asia, like Indonesia, the Philippines, Malaysia, and out into the Pacific Ocean as far as like Hawaii, and then down south kind of in the area around like Fiji, French Polynesia, those areas. The giant manta ray lives globally around the equator. So typically warmer waters, but a little bit into the temperate zone. So that's kind of not warm, not hot, not cold waters. Places like California. Although they're rarely seen in California, they are seen decently just south of here in Mexico off of Baja. The giant manta rays also differ from the reef manta rays in that across their back coloring is usually black on both species with some white coloration or stripes. On the giant manta rays, that white pattern is typically more a T shape, and on the reef manta, it's typically more a Y shape. And if you think about a Y and a T, they look pretty similar. Therefore, it took science a while to figure out that they were indeed different species. Especially confusing if you meet a younger giant manta ray, it might be in the size range of a reef manta ray. On both giant and reef manta rays, they exhibit something that we've talked about before called counter shading. I talked about that for the first time in Critter Chat when we talked about penguins. It's very common for a lot of ocean animals and some land animals where their top surface is darker color than their bottom surface. That way, if they are small or being a prey species, when an animal is above it looking down, their dark back covering will kind of help them blend into the darker shadowy surface below. But if the predator is below them looking up, the lighter undersurface will also kind of blend in with the lighter surface coloration in the ocean. That also helps them as they are hunting. Being a predator, they can kind of sneak in and blend in a little better that other animals may not see them so well. So both the giant and the reef manta ray are predators, but they eat something very, very small. Despite the fact that they are huge animals themselves, they mostly eat plankton, the little smallest, tiniest animals and plants in the ocean. The giant manta ray also will eat some species of fish, particularly the smaller fish that may school things like sardines, capelin, herring, things along those lines. They're not going to go after a big fish, even though they are a big fish, because they're not really designed to eat something that big. They have a very special way of feeding. So other big animals that eat very tiny animals in the ocean would be things like the giant whales, the baleen whales that we talked about in Critter Chat about baleen whales. And also an animal we will talk about in the future called the whale shark, which is also a plankton eater. But with the manta rays, as they swim, they have a very huge, long mouth, and they'll open that very big as they swim along. But then they have this very special adaptation that other ray species typically don't have, and it is called cephalic lobes, and it's two little appendages that kind of stick out the front. For a while, people thought they were horns, so they are sometimes called devilfish because they thought they were horns, kind of like the devil. But these little lobes in front, they can kind of maneuver how they're shaped. And so when they're feeding, they'll curl those like this, and their mouth sits kind of behind that. And so these lobes kind of help funnel and filter any of the little shrimps, the krill, the plankton into their mouth. And so they'll swim with an open mouth with their cephalic lobes curled to filter that right back into their mouth. And then the water rushes into their mouth and then out through their gills, giving them the oxygen they need and also trapping inside all of the food that they want. Now, I luckily have seen manta rays. I saw them at an aquarium. There's one aquarium in the United States that has them. That is the Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta, Georgia. That's where the photo I posted earlier on the Facebook and Instagram was taken. And during my time at the Georgia Aquarium, I saw them do a manta ray feeding. It was absolutely phenomenal because manta rays, as they feed, they'll use a variety of different strategies. So even at the aquarium, they'll do this. They'll kind of swim in somersaults. And as they do, they open their big mouth up near the surface, and that's where the krill is, up near the surface. Krill are also little tiny shrimp-like animals. But as they swim up, they open their mouth, they catch a lot of that food, and then they kind of push the water out through their gills as they're on the bottom of the somersault. And then as they come back up, they'll catch another mouthful of food. They'll also sometimes do barrel rolls where they'll roll like this, side to side, but similarly in that they'll have their mouth open near the top, close it, push the water out past their gills on the bottom of the roll, and then open it again as they come back up near the top. That's particularly something they'll do when there's a lot of food near the surface of the water. That swimming technique really helps aid them in catching the most food in the shortest amount of time. But it's really an incredible behavior to witness. I'll see if I can find a video of that I can share later on. They will also sometimes do something called chain feeding, where they'll get kind of in a line of different manta rays, and they'll kind of help create a school of the krill and kind of push it together into a tighter area, and then they'll all kind of move in together, each taking a turn, each taking a gulp to kind of catch their food as they're eating. What else? Oh, when there's a group of manta rays, they're largely solitary, so you don't see them in a big school. It's rare that you see more than a handful together. You'll sometimes see like 2 or 3, 5, if they're all feeding, but otherwise they're usually solitary. If you see a group of them together, that group is called a squadron of manta rays, which I think is pretty cool. It's an impressive word to describe a group of a very impressive animal. Typically, they feed near the surface, as much of their food likes to hang out in that top layer of the ocean near the surface. But they have been observed sometimes at very deep levels, especially the giant manta ray, the bigger one. They have observed them as low as 3,500 feet below the ocean surface. So they do go deeper, possibly in times when they're not feeding, to stay a little more cool, or possibly just to stay out of the zone where other things are going on, maybe to rest. They really don't know. One thing that I think is super cool about them, manta rays, as well as many other large species of fish in the ocean, have a very special relationship with some other animals. And that is something that I think it's depicted in Finding Nemo too, where they'll go up to a reef and little fish called cleaner wrasse will come out, and they'll kind of go around the bigger fish and clean off any dead skin, any parasites, and they'll kind of do a little like car wash situation for the big fish. And manta rays are notorious for visiting the same cleaning spots over and over and over again. So even though the giant manta rays live in open ocean in the big middle part of the sea, they will often visit reef areas for cleanings, and the same individual will come back to the same reef spot again and again and again. Now, how do we know that? How do we know it's the same individual? On their bellies, on their bottom side of the manta ray, they have a series of spots and color patterns. And it's pretty much, they think that it's pretty true that it is unique to each animal. Similar to like our fingerprints, or like the stripes on a zebra, the spots on a giraffe. Looking for those individual unique things has helped a lot of science and researchers identify individuals. And they've noticed that some giant manta rays come near reefs for cleaning spots. Sometimes those reefs are very popular tourist destinations, so a manta ray gets filmed multiple times in the same area, but they know that that manta ray doesn't necessarily live in that spot. It's just they're visiting for a cleaning. With manta rays, they have a pretty slow reproduction cycle. So typically after breeding the female manta ray, her gestation or her pregnancy is between 12 and 13 months. She usually gives birth to one pup, occasionally two, but mostly one. So twins happen, but it's not very common. And after that very long pregnancy, which their pregnancy is a little different than like mammal pregnancies, because the baby's actually inside an egg inside her body. The egg stays in her body the whole time, and it's not like a chicken egg. It's not a hard shell. It doesn't look like that. It doesn't feel like that. It's much softer. And during that time, the baby is growing inside this egg and gaining nutrients from a yolk. And then shortly before birth, the egg will break, and the baby will be born through a live birth. And if you know kind of the shape of a manta ray, when they're born, their wings, their big, long, kind of what we would call our arms, are rolled up. So if you think of a manta ray or any ray as kind of a tortilla, imagine it rolled up like a burrito when it's born. And then when it's born, it kind of unfolds into a flat tortilla. With them only having one pup at a time and their gestation period being about a year long, typically females that have been documented only have a baby every 2 or 3 or sometimes even every 5 years. So they're pretty slow to reproduce, and that has been a bit of a problem for them as their populations are decreasing and they're not able to reproduce very quickly. That can be a pretty big problem. Now, luckily for them and for us, because they're great and we want to have them around, they do live fairly long lives. They live about 40 to 50 years. We haven't pinpointed real close to when. We know they can live up into that range. Again, science is still studying and doing a lot of research. But they're not mature, able to reproduce on their own, until they're about 10 years old. So they have to live quite a long time and get pretty big before they're able to reproduce. With that, they live fairly long, so they could have a number of babies throughout their lifetime, but it still is a very long, slow process. Manta rays also have a very large brain. Considering their size, they're very large animals. They also have a very large brain, but the ratio between brain size and body size is high, meaning even for how big they are, they still have a very large brain. And science are still doing a lot of research about that, but they think that they are probably very intelligent animals, which is kind of weird and strange because they're fish. But I have seen some pretty high functioning skills from some rays during my time at the aquarium. The aquarium I worked at, we did not have manta rays. I want to be clear about that. People always asked where the manta rays were. I said, we don't have manta rays, but we do have eagle rays, and we have cow nose rays, and we have bat rays, and we have all sorts of other rays, but not manta rays. Manta rays are huge. It's very difficult to keep them in an aquarium setting, although the Georgia Aquarium has them. They're also in an exhibit there that is the size of a football field. So it's a very, very, very large aquarium with a very large exhibit. Manta rays are listed as vulnerable to extinction. Both the giant manta ray and the reef manta ray are listed as vulnerable. Both have decreasing populations. Now, it's also a little tricky to measure because they live over a huge expanse of the world, with giant manta rays having a global distribution and the reef manta rays living everywhere from Africa over to Hawaii. That's still a very large space. Their biggest threat is overfishing. They are caught for a number of different reasons. In some places of the world, they eat them. In some places of the world, they catch them and use them as bait, cutting them up into smaller pieces to catch other things. In some places, they're caught for their skin. Their skin kind of has almost a sandpaper-like texture. And several species of rays are used in leather to make things like boots and furniture and all sorts of things. But mostly their biggest threat for being caught is their gills. Their gills and the apparatus around their gills that helps filter out the water and catch in their food is highly valued in traditional medicine in many parts of Asia. And it is thought to be a medicinal cure for things like chicken pox and for increasing blood circulation. It is estimated that the industry of catching manta ray gills, just the gills, is worth $30 million a year. So that's a lot of money. There's a lot of people willing to pay a lot of money to get just this one part of the manta. And sometimes they will catch them, cut their gills out, throw the rest back, which one, I think that's pretty cruel to throw an animal back into its environment when it's going to die. Two, it's very wasteful if you're going to kill a big, huge animal like that. If you're only using one part of its body, that's a very wasteful practice, in my opinion. but their overfishing by humans has caused huge problems in many of their populations. So some countries got together and in 2011 decided to protect manta rays, both species, throughout international waters. So in places that don't belong to any one country, they're protected on a global scale. Now, if a country didn't sign into that treaty, they don't follow that law, so they are still caught in some of those places. In addition, shortly after that, several countries protected them in their own waters, including Ecuador, Peru, Mexico, the Philippines, and New Zealand have all banned specific fishing for them. Now, sometimes a law doesn't mean that they're actually safe. They are sometimes still caught accidentally when people are fishing for other things. Sometimes they are still hurt in that process or killed. And sometimes they are allowed to be kept even if they're accidentally caught. So if you're trying to catch them but not really trying to catch them, there are sneaky ways of going around that, and that is still existing because it's very lucrative to make some money if you sell the right part to the right people. Some good hope about that, though, is in 2014, Indonesia, which is a country who has struggled economically for many, many years, they also have a huge population. There's a lot of people there, and a lot of people need to eat, but they officially banned hunting on manta rays, and they're doing a pretty good job of trying to enforce that. They also don't allow manta rays to be traded, so even if you accidentally catch one in Indonesia, you can't bring it into port and then try to sell it, even if you accidentally caught it. And the reason why is because Indonesia actually has one of the biggest populations of both the manta ray species, the giant and the reef manta ray, and they understand that there is good money to be had from tourism. Because giant manta rays are the largest rays in the world and reef manta rays are not far behind that, they know that there is good money from tourists who will come to see them. And they've set up areas, and you may have heard of some of these or seen some of these. I know in Hawaii, there are places you can go and dive or snorkel with manta rays. They will often do it in the evening. They'll turn on big lights over the ocean to attract the plankton, and then the rays come to eat the plankton. And you can be out there swimming or snorkeling or diving with them during those time frames. And it is very lucrative, so it's good money for tourism dollars. The Indonesian government in 2014 said, we're gonna focus on tourism with manta rays instead of fishing with manta rays. They figured that the money they get from one dead manta ray is about $500 total. The money you can get from one live manta ray over its 40 to 50 year lifespan is closer to $1 million per individual animal. And so because of that, they said, let's try to invest in this tourism. Let's make that the thing that we're gonna go after for money. And it's proven to help out in Indonesia. There's a lot of places doing a lot of good work. Unfortunately, we still have a lot we need to learn about manta rays. Our special shout out today is to the Georgia Aquarium, who is one of the leading science research facilities in the United States doing work with manta rays. They specifically have a field research area in Mexico where they've been studying whale sharks, and they've noticed an increase of manta rays in the area where they're studying whale sharks. And during their studies there, they realized, this is kind of a 2-for-1. We can study the whale sharks and the manta rays, both of which eat plankton. And so they've started doing tagging on the manta rays, where they have a GPS signal or a tracker that they attach to the manta ray. And then when it's near the surface, that transmits up to a satellite, and they can kind of track where this animal goes. When they're deep water, it doesn't work. The signal can't get up through the water, so they have to be near the surface for the tracking to work. But with that, they're learning a lot about the population of mantas and whale sharks in the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico, near the coast of Mexico, specifically around the Yucatan Peninsula, near Cancun. So the Georgia Aquarium is doing some amazing work there. Like I mentioned earlier, Georgia Aquarium is the one time and place I've seen manta rays. I absolutely was fascinated to watch them eat, to learn a little bit about them while I was there. And they are certainly an animal I look forward to someday seeing out in the wild, although I have not been able to do so just yet. But it's something I look forward to doing, and hopefully that will be a realized dream at some point. That's what I have to share with you about manta rays today. Oh, and ways that we can all help out sustainable seafood. Make sure you know what it is you're eating if you're eating fish or shellfish and where it's coming from. Helping to control the consumer demand for fish that we eat is a big part of helping to control and regulate the fishing industry on a global scale, and making sure that what we're eating and consuming is safe for the ocean populations of many things out there. That's a way we can all help out. If you want more information about that, we talked about that in yesterday's Critter Chat about the Seafood Watch. There is a website for that, and also a app you can get for your phone that helps you make good decisions if you're buying seafood or going to a seafood restaurant, of which menu items are better. Also, if you're at a restaurant, you can ask your waiter, what is this catch of the day? Where did it come from? Where was that fish? If they can't answer that question, they may not be the best choice of a restaurant for you to be eating at. If they can't tell you where the food came from, they're probably not very good at understanding their own supply line, and maybe part of the problem instead of part of the solution. So look for ways that you can be involved in making better choices that way. As always, like, follow, subscribe, and share to any of my Zoo Nerd content across all the platforms. This Critter Chat, as well as the others, also live on my website at jeremythezoonerd.com, so check that out. And until tomorrow, be happy, be healthy, have fun. See you tomorrow. Bye.